So she became Prime Minister, and she moved incredibly quickly. She didn't even have to. There was no particular pressure on her to move this quickly. But what she did during the campaign, we've missed the campaign a bit, haven't we? Because what got her the popularity among the membership was the nonsense, the sweet little lies about Brexit. The gateway drug to Trussonomics was lies about trade deals. But then what she did during the campaign was go full Tufton Street. She essentially became a mouthpiece for the Institute of Economic Affairs, a secretly funded lobby group, essentially, that always insists that it's actually a think tank. Technically, it's an educational charity. But they have been dedicated for decades to the idea that if businesses are free to do whatever they want and keep as much money as is humanly possible, then somehow the rest of the country will benefit. I think the second bit of that is actually a lie. But that's the ideology. That's the claim. I think the second bit is everybody knows it's a nonsense, but they have to say it, because if they just came out and said everybody, all rich people should be able to do whatever the hell they want and all poor people should have absolutely no protections whatsoever, that probably wouldn't play well. So you have to add on the end, oh, and by the way, that would be really good for poor people. And then you get your season ticket on the BBC or ITV or LBC or wherever it is. So you describe something that's utterly vampiric, hideous, devoid of anything remotely resembling compassion or any concept of society, and you just stick on the end, oh, and that would be really good for poor people. And that's trickle-down economics. Let the rich do whatever the hell they want, screw the poor, and that will be really good for poor people. All together now, Tufton Street, hymn books, and that would be really good for poor people. You could even set up an organisation dedicated entirely to protecting epic wealth and call it the Taxpayers Alliance, because then you're pretending that it's good for taxpayers. So we're just going to create politics that entirely fetishises epic wealth, unaccountable wealth, offshore wealth, and that will be really good for taxpayers. So that's how you do it. And if that was a drug, Liz Truss is a junkie. That was the regurgitated bilge that built her entire leadership campaign. Once it became a two-horse race, she was out there promising to give more and more money to the richest individuals, the richest corporations in the country, whether it was a tax cut for people earning over £150,000 a year. I'll say that again because you still might not believe me at the back. An actual tax cut in the midst of a cost of living crisis for the richest, the biggest tax cut for the highest earners in the country. The banker's bonus cap that was brought in order to guard against a repeat of the 2008 financial crisis, we'll get rid of that as well. That's still, by the way, gone. That was one of the things that hasn't been reversed, because to be fair, it doesn't have much impact on the public purse, and you could make a case for saying that it would actually raise more tax, presuming that bankers with enormous bonuses actually pay all of their income tax. So she mainlined this filthy ideology, this fetishization of greed, and regurgitated it to people who always think they're on the winning side of inequality and injustice. Because who on earth is going to vote to make themselves richer but everybody else poorer? Answer, people who think they're going to be richer. So that's what she did. She said, we're going to cut this and we're going to cut that and stuff them, but cut this and cut that. And they loved it. They lapped it up. They loved all of it. And then a little bit of xenophobia. The jury's still out on Emmanuel Macron. Oh, yeah, frogs, down with the French. And she just played them like an old accordion. She played them like a steel guitar. Didn't win by as much as perhaps some people thought she was going to win by, including herself. Definitely benefited from the kind of Tory that would never countenance having a brown Prime Minister or a brown party leader. But I still think that they are a shrinking constituency. But the promises she made were categorically about unfettered wealth being free to do what it wants, because that would be really good for poor people. And Rishi Sunak, who has never struck me as a man who lies awake at night worrying about the poor, understood that actually the prioritisation of growth or economic stability was going to be thrown into disarray by what she was promising to do. He wasn't motivated by concern about pensioners who can't pay their energy bills, or about teachers who are having to use food banks, or about nurses who are leaving the profession because they're being expected to survive on a pittance. He, as a banker, was concerned about market stability, and he understood market stability, and he understood what would happen to the pound if the markets decided that the British government was criminally unstable. And he warned that you do not control inflation by cutting taxes. And that interest rates will go up if the Bank of England is forced to act to mitigate some of the impacts of a policy that Liz Truss was describing while standing next to him on the podium. A quick apology to Krishnan Gurumurthy of Channel 4 News. I suggested last week that all of the people who'd hosted those so-called hustings had been utterly derelict in their duty by failing properly to pick up Liz Truss on what was blindingly obvious about what she was saying and what Rishi Sunak sometimes seemed to be shouting into the wind while the party faithful in the room lapped up whatever it was that Truss was serving up. Krishnan Gurumurthy absolutely did a good job when he hosted a debate between the two of them. I can't remember anybody else doing that, which is why I suspect that for the actual party-organised hustings, the people who host them are very carefully selected by the party. So Liz Truss got away with murder during those hustings, and the promises she made, this is where it gets really interesting. She then kept. I don't know that anyone was expecting that to happen quite so quickly. She kept them all. She stood up, Kwasi Kwarteng, with her fingerprints all over his speech, stood up and kept all of the promises she made to become Prime Minister. And did so within days of getting through the doors of Downing Street. I mean, from one angle, this is great. This is politicians actually keeping their promises. This is politicians actually doing exactly what it says on the tin. This is politicians campaigning in poetry and then governing in poetry as well. In one way, it's a good thing, because the promises she kept were a pile of poo. And they did exactly what Rishi Sunak said they were going to do, and sent the pound into free fall and the markets into retreat. And all of this was fewer than 4 weeks ago. Fewer than 4 weeks ago. Fewer than 28 days ago. And then we come to the current chapter, which involves jettisoning the man who kept her promises, jettisoning the man who kept the promises that made her Prime Minister, somehow trying to cast him as the can carrier. I'm Liz Truss, I made loads of promises. Kwasi Kwarteng, who nobody voted for to become Chancellor, then stood up and kept all the promises that I made. It's all gone horribly wrong, therefore Kwasi Kwarteng is the door. I mean, you just add disloyalty to idiocy and cowardice in the list of things at the top of Liz Truss's prime ministerial CV. And she replaces him with Jeremy Hunt. Reports that other people didn't fancy the job, but she replaces him with Jeremy Hunt, who then incredibly, within days of getting the job, announces the abandonment of every single promise she made to get elected and then kept. With the plan being what? To keep her in the job? Or to just literally leave her sitting in the corner like little Lizzie Horner, no longer allowed to influence anything, utterly removed from the reins of power, a Prime Minister in name only, a cipher in the decision-making process, an irrelevance around the cabinet table, while Jeremy Hunt, arguably one of the worst Secretary of States for Health we've ever had, while Jeremy Hunt is charged with restoring stability to the markets, to the economy. And that, I think, is where we are. And what was his master plan for restoring stability? What was his master plan for rescuing the situation? What were the original ideas he came up with that nobody had ever come up with before? Well, there weren't any. He very simply undid everything that she did. Everything. Except national insurance rise that was designed to address the funding crisis at the heart of social care in this country. And that at the time seemed like quite a good idea. It's like a ventriloquist sacking the dummy for saying the wrong thing. The dismissal of Kwasi Kwarteng. It's like Keith Harris sacked Orville because Orville said something that didn't get down very well with the audience. And now Jeremy Hunt is there. You don't need a ventriloquist anymore because he is doing whatever the hell he wants and she can't touch him. So who is currently governing this country? Who's in charge? Answer, not Liz Truss, who doesn't have a mandate anyway, but was at least elected by the members of the Conservative Party who fell for her nonsense about Brexit and lapped up all her promises to do exactly what she did, which brought the country to its knees. So Jeremy Hunt is in charge. A man who I think went out in the first round of the Conservative leadership candidate. But from every imaginable angle, this is a destruction, a corruption, a demolition of almost everything that matters. We've seen years now, since 2016, of evidence not mattering. But even now, in the context of the Conservative Party, the bloke essentially in charge is the first bloke to be shown the door by MPs when he threw his hat into the leadership ring just, 3 months ago, was it? It's so hard to keep track of time. And he's now in charge. He is essentially holding Liz Truss hostage. She's sitting there holding up a copy of today's Times, begging for the ransom to be paid. But there is no ransom that can be paid because she is toast. She is over. She is finished. And all of this, every single syllable of this, was entirely and utterly unnecessary. Every single bit of it was avoidable, but became inevitable when we decided that reality didn't matter, that unicorns did exist, and that the sunlit uplands of Brexit were just over the horizon. It's 11:47 now. Barely drawn breath, because this is not supposed to be happening. This is not normal. This is not in any way acceptable, never mind desirable. But it's been done deliberately to our country by people who claim to be patriotic. It's the ultimate irony. These are the people that call the rest of us, criticise the rest of us for talking the country down. Tell you what, talking the country down on the one hand, setting fire to the country on the other, I'll take the talkers every time, but telling the truth is not talking the country down. And patriotism does not involve mourning for the loss of what we once had and what we once valued. Patriotism involves shouting at the top of your lungs to these saboteurs and arsonists that we will not put up with this. Because if we do, as a nation, this is what happens. This is where we end up. Ridiculous. Ridiculous. It's embarrassing what's happening now. Look at what this looks like from anywhere else. What have they done now? Well, you know those policies they brought in 3.5 weeks ago that utterly tanked the pound and turned the markets into an absolute mess? Yeah. They've completely abandoned all of them. What? They've completely abandoned all of them. But they've got the same Prime Minister. Come on then. 03456060973 is a number you need if you'd like to interrupt this stream of consciousness. It's 11:53. I should probably let someone else speak, shouldn't I? Deborah's in Leigh-on-Sea. Deborah, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome. You're very lucky. You're very lucky, actually. I could quite happily carry on right through to Sheila Fogarty. But go on, nobody wants that.
I was just thinking, I'm going back to your Porsche and Lamborghini analogy. Obviously, you changed it around, so the first thing you bought was the Porsche, and then you went out and bought a Lamborghini. We were all crying out for months and months and months that the government needed to buy a Porsche. Everyone has been stressing and worrying. While Boris was still having his, running around the country, having his leaving parties, and Truss was telling her little lies in the hustings, people were calling out, all of you, the three of you, sit down. One of you is going to be ex-Prime Minister, and one of the other two is going to be Prime Minister. Yes. Put the Porsche on the table now.
Give us some help with our energy bills. Tell us what you're going to do to help us get through the energy bill crisis.
So then she tells all her okay, everybody. So all you 150,000 that out of the 150,000 members that voted me in, look, here's the Porsche. Look, I bought you a Lamborghini. And they're all going, this is brilliant. And the rest of us are going, we just want the Porsche. And the markets knew that the government had to buy a Porsche, and we're going to expect a Porsche, and we're going to have to pay for the Porsche. And then the markets went, why have you just bought a Lamborghini? Yeah. You can't afford a Lamborghini.
You can't separate the two. You can't. And also, maybe you can afford a Lamborghini. Could you just show us your calculations? To which Kwasi Kwarteng said, no, don't be ridiculous. How dare you ask to see my calculations?
Exactly. It's a completely it's like you've bought a Porsche, but you haven't told me how you're going to buy the Porsche. Yeah. But you've also bought a Lamborghini.
Taking it all back to energy.
Shouting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so everyone... And then she's like, well, why is everyone going on about the Lamborghini? I think the Porsche as well. Yes, but you've overridden the Porsche with the Lamborghini. It's and we were crying out for months and months and months. Please, sit down like adults.
Do you know who else in the last 10 minutes? Do you know who has offered up an analysis extremely similar to yours? And I hope you'll take this as a compliment. Martin Lewis. Ah. Martin Lewis, the money-saving expert.
Well, I do listen to him a lot.
But you haven't seen this yet. He only wrote it at 11:42. It's 11:55 now. It's arguable that the entire...
He might have been on the radio a little bit 10 minutes earlier. I could have taken...
No, I'm giving you full credit for it. You were on hold. You were on hold before he started writing that. During the zombie government, due to the leadership contest, even though it was blindingly obvious energy intervention was needed, no plans were made or promised. And this is what came to bite her on the backside subsequently.
Yeah. No.
It's true. Yeah, what happens next? How are you feeling? That's the question of the day. How are you feeling?
Complete despair.
Yeah.
Despair, really. Utter despair. Just, I know.
That'll do.
Yeah, it is. I despair.
It is despair. And I mean, I guess the more you understand it, the more despair you feel, which is odd. You know, you almost envy the ostriches or you envy the cultists. But the more you understand, the more despair you feel. I'll take one crumb of comfort from this. I did an event in Bewdley in Worcestershire on Thursday evening, which was very near where I grew up, very much next door to my hometown. It was a lovely event, a very warm room, and I got lovely comments afterwards. And somebody said to me that they used the word despair. That's why I'm reminded of it by Deborah. She said, whenever I feel despair, at least I know I understand what's going on because I've been listening to your show since 2016. And I thought, well, I don't know whether, I mean, that's a lovely thing to say, but I don't know whether you'd be better off listening to Mantovani, and then you wouldn't at least have the despair. But it's always better to understand. It's always better to understand what's happening. And if you've been listening to this show over the last few years, I can say with my hand on my heart that none of this would have taken you by surprise. None of what's happened will have taken you by surprise. You may not thank me for it, even if you've been listening, insisting that I've been wrong about everything. Now you know I'm not. You shouldn't have been taken by surprise because I've described and predicted and explained almost every single step of this national catastrophe. And the bits I haven't done on air, I've done in my 2 books. And that's the end of this public service announcement. Rod's in Manchester. Rod, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. So basically, we can come back to Brexit on this because the 2 major components of Brexit were, one, obviously keeping out foreigners, but remember the second one was sovereignty, the idea that we had to get back our sovereignty.
Yeah, after the event. Control. Let's say control rather than sovereignty. I think that will help your point more, won't it?
Yeah, well, if you want. But the point is that what's happened today demonstrates that Britain cannot be an exceptionalist country. At the end of the day, we're part of a world market. And, this is always the problem with the EU. It's like, the EU imposing all these things on us, and we want our sovereignty back. But it never works like that. You trade sovereignty for trade agreements. That's the whole point. You have to come into it. It's like entering into a marriage and saying, I'm going to do everything I like. I'm getting married, but I want complete control of my whole life forever and ever. Amen. Yeah. No adult behaves like that.
Or even just playing chess. Even playing chess and saying, I'm going to decide what moves my pieces can make while everybody else plays by the rules that have been in place for 1,000 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it's crazy, but so now you see it. So now today is a beautiful demonstration of the utter lie of this, whatever you want to call it, taking back control. Yeah. We couldn't take back control because at the end of the day, we're not in control of the world market. Like, there's rules that people play by, and if Britain won't play by those rules, then they're going to say, okay, that's fine, don't play by the rules, but you're going to get punished for it because, you're not.
Was there anything in the mini budget that we couldn't have done as members of the single market?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I hadn't thought about that deeply, but
no, I mean they're ideologically linked, and that notion of control. Because I just wonder what the impact as a counterfactual. Thank you, Rod. Take back control. How's that working out for you, lads? So much control, so much sweet control. But as a counterfactual, the markets would not have been as scared by these announcements if we had still been part of the single market. I mean, if we were part of a single currency, we'd have been insulated against all sorts of things. But I don't know what we would or wouldn't have been allowed to do in the context of that mini budget as members of the single currency. As members of the single market, I can't immediately see anything except the bankers' bonus cap. I don't think we'd have been able to abolish that, but that's staying anyway. The rest of it, every single thing that was announced and then abandoned, I don't know. Anyway, more of your thoughts after this. It's a coup, isn't it, really, what we just witnessed? Peter Walker of The Guardian describes it as a very polite coup. Sam Friedman, who works in the area, talks about it being a bit like after a military coup when the general appears on television delivering a calming announcement on state television. It's impossible to convey the scale of this in political terms. I'm sure I don't need to for your benefit, but for other people less plugged into the circus, you just had a Chancellor of the Exchequer essentially remove a Prime Minister from power, from relevance. So I can't see her seeing the week out, right? That's not a prediction. That's not an observation. I'm wary of predictions. Sometimes I might even place a bet off air without predicting that what I've placed a bet on is going to happen on air. And if anyone did put £1,000 on Liz Truss being gone by Christmas at 7-1 last week, well done you. But it's not a prediction. I just can't currently see how she sees the week out. But I could be taken by surprise by events. How does Liz Truss see the week out? So let's work on the premise that she goes. I mean, what would PMQs be like on Wednesday? Where would Keir Starmer even begin? Last Wednesday, as in 5 days ago, she was furiously defending all the things that she's just abandoned. Furiously defending them and attacking the Labour Party for something that they've now today adopted. That's incredible. I mean, it's unprecedented. It's utterly inconceivable. But that's what's happened. So how can she possibly avoid? Well, she won't, will she? So she gets replaced, goodness knows how. I'm going to ask you a really simple question, and I want you to answer it. Can you see a way forward that doesn't involve a general election? 0345 60 60 973. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. You can answer yes or no, obviously. But you see, technically, there's not going to be a general election. Technically, there is no need for a general election. I can't quite see how we get our third Prime Minister off the back of one general election. Remember, most of the promises made by Boris Johnson in 2019 have turned out to be absolute toot. Absolute toot. That often gets overlooked, especially by people like Nadine Dorries calling for him to make a comeback. He's just a very good liar, and some people still believe the lies that he tells. But I just want to know what you think. I've run out now of energy, intellectual energy. I've expended it all trying to make sense of the madness that's unfolded thus far. So as I look at the road ahead, I think it's time for you to do some heavy lifting. Technically, there is no need whatsoever for a general election, and any Conservative leader who inherits the mantle of power from Liz Truss would, on one level, be an absolute idiot to call for a general election. It's 30 points behind in the polls. Things have got to get better. In the words of Dee Ream, no less, those sage political commentators from the 1990s, things can only get better in the polls. Surely things can't actually get worse. Therefore, we hang on for as long as we can and have a general election when things have got better and look like they're not going to get any better than they currently have. But I just can't see it. I mean, intuitively, I can't see it. But emotionally, I can't. Politically, I just can't. How do you avoid a general election? Or do they just plough on regardless? What do you think? I'll take a couple more calls from people who've been on hold for blooming hours, given the state of my monologues this morning, but I've had an awful lot to get off my chest, and then we'll get stuck into the general election question. So Liz in Hemel Hempstead almost certainly can't remember why she rang in the first place.
Hello, Joe.
Hello.
Nice to speak to you. I've never phoned in before, but
welcome aboard.
Thank you. I just say a little bit about myself. I'm a 76-year-old widow. My husband died from COVID after only being in a care home since for 7 weeks. Right. He had Alzheimer's. But since 1979, we both have followed the right wing of the Tory party, the 1922 committee, etc., and the ERG group. Their ideology goes on. Even if they are out of power, they don't care. They just regroup and carry on. Then Farage came along and pushed Cameron into the referendum, and much to his shock, we voted to come out. Mm-hmm. And when these fanatical ideologists taste power, they attract people even madder than they are. We tried to tell our friends, but were told we were unpatriotic and communist.
Because you and your husband were Remainers and most of your friends were Brexit, right?
Absolutely. We went out with some friends one day. There was 20 of us at a table, and I said to my husband, I bet we were the only ones that were Remain. And unfortunately, I was right.
Good grief. Well, there it is. Wow. Wow.
So So then I don't talk about it.
Sure.
I've been told that we don't talk about politics, religion, or something else. You know?
I can never remember what the other one is.
Well, I can't. Not this time of the morning, anyway.
And here we are.
Yes. And I wish, James, that I was wrong, and I had to apologise.
Same.
I do apologise for things that I get wrong, and we all get things wrong.
Yeah.
I don't care about myself, but I care. I look at my grandchildren of 4 and 7, and although they're quite reasonably well off, I cry for them because we've had the freedoms, we've had, my generation has had everything. We've had, money, we've had
affordable property, pensions.
Properties, we've had everything. And I think I'm ashamed.
Well, you've got nothing to be ashamed of, and I'm not going to patronise you by explaining why. I'm just going to ask your opinion on why so many of your generation don't see it as clearly as you do. Why do you? Because they're good people, they're your friends. We're not in the business of slagging them off, but they just don't see what you see, do they?
No, because they don't. People are busy.
Yeah.
Their lives. They don't take interest in politics. I think because I took interest in politics because my dad did.
Right.
And he used to haul me out as a teenager and put flyers through the doors and things like that. So I suppose I've never been a member of anything, but I just take an interest in the psychology of what makes them tick.
Yeah.
These people tick, and where they come from, where they actually their thoughts come from. And
it's often resentment. It first happened to me at college. I was at the LSE and I didn't get involved in student politics. I was too busy doing much more exciting things. But I went along a couple of times, and there was this bizarre group, and it turned out that some of them actually did end up on Tofton Street, and I accidentally sat in the middle of them during a debate, and they were motivated by resentment. They thought that everybody who needed help was lying. They thought that everybody who needed support from the state was lying, and that all of their rich dads were paying taxes to support feckless Workshire layabouts, and there was no real need for the welfare state, or there was no real need for, free school meals or whatever it was. They just thought everybody who wasn't comfortably off was either a liar or lazy.
Yeah.
It was that simple, Liz. It was that simple.
Well, I think since 2010, I listen to LBC a lot and BBC, whatever, and I listen to how people phone in their thoughts, the psychology of how they think, and they were very clever that they actually made everybody turn against each other. Yeah. They're lazy. They get benefits. They have children just to get accounts. All the things. And I'm not saying some things don't happen because they do.
Of course.
But I'm not a jealous person. I'm not. And I understand that. I think most people just want to be able to have a bit of money in their pocket, be able to afford a decent home. Have a bit of money in their pocket, have a little car, and we can't all hit the heights.
No, well, getting on with it is what you describe, isn't it? You're right, and yet the more poison that gets poured into public discourse, the more energy we expend on, as you say, either being jealous or being thinking that other people are unworthy.
Yes. And most of them read the Daily Mail, I might add.
He's talking about your friends now, I think.
They're probably listening. Well, no, I don't think they are.
No, the damage it's done the damage the Daily Mail has done to the country and indeed to families, it's immeasurable, isn't it? Absolutely immeasurable. Because they believe it all. They think every refugee is a criminal or a terrorist. Everybody on universal credit is
solving the problem, But I'm just quickly say that if my country breaks up, I'll be heartbroken because I'm not a monarchist. I'm a very committed Democrat. Yeah. And even if Starmer gets in the next election, the expectations of what people want from him will be so huge.
You're not wrong. I can't believe it's taken you so long to ring me.
Well,
imagine how popular this show would be if you were on regularly, Liz.
I'm a bit nervous.
Oh, you're brilliant, and I've really enjoyed listening to you.
Thank you, James, and I will phone again.
I look forward to it. I will, and you take care as well. Thank you, Liz, coming from different set of experiences, but my goodness me, a pretty close to inarguable set of conclusions. And she mentioned the king, she mentioned the monarchy at least. One of my favourite tweeters, Andrew Levi, who tweets us at Andrew PR Levi, Levi. he points out that she could actually go to the king and ask for a dissolution of parliament and call a general election. The cabinet can't stop her, and the party can't stop her. Only the king could. But surely he wouldn't, would he? Asks Andrew. I don't know how either constitutionally likely that is, but since 1918, the Prime Minister has had the sole power to ask for a dissolution of Parliament and then, of course, the subsequent election. The King could refuse the Prime Minister's requests, but the circumstances in which he could do that are pretty ambiguous because normally, of course, he has to act on the Prime Minister's advice. Wow. I mean, I mean, what is going through her head right now? You could almost feel sorry for her, couldn't you? Just on a human, don't text me saying no. I appreciate that it's quite easy not to feel sorry for her. But on a purely human level, how could two Liz's be so different? Liz Truss and Liz, our last caller. What's in her name? But my goodness me, what is she even thinking now? What is she even thinking? Even last week, she was thinking, can we style this out? Can we see this through? Then she gets rid of Kwarteng, so it's all about survival. It's all about self-interest. And now, as part of the survival process, she puts Jeremy Hunt in the Treasury, and Jeremy Hunt abandons every single thing, every promise she made and kept in order to become Prime Minister. What is Liz Truss thinking right now? It's 12:15. It's 18 minutes after 12. Try and get Martin Lewis up in the next few minutes. I'll say his name into the mirror 3 times and see if he appears. That's how these things work. A few of you mentioning how therapeutic you find the programme. I just want to say, absolutely, that is two-way traffic. Goodness me, I don't know what I'd do without getting to spend 3 hours with you every morning. It's just to get stuff off my chest, but also to remember that we're not alone in our confusions and our contemplations. Simon is in Dover. Simon, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, I've always thought that I had a pretty good handle on what the political parties stand for and what their aims and objectives are. But, the last few years I've become very, very confused about what the Conservatives stand for and what they're aiming for. I've always kind of believed that actually their number one priority was just to stay in power so that they can, feather their nest and keep everyone happy that they need to keep happy. But the last few days or the last couple of weeks, I'm like, it's just like they've thrown out the rule book entirely, and now I've got no idea what's going on, and I don't know what any of them are playing at. So I'm just like, it's uncharted territory now.
It's really nice. It's really nicely put. I mean, off the top of my head, I'd suggest the Conservative Party, in the sense that you described, doesn't exist anymore. I mean, the idea that Jonathan Gullis and Tom Tugendhat or Rory Stewart previously could sit in the same camp, or that Nadine Dorries could sit in the same camp as Anna Soubry, that clearly doesn't exist anymore, does it? That party. And maybe when the division is so deep, that ability to pull together to prioritise power over everything else becomes diminished.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, listening to Jeremy Hunt this morning, I thought to myself, right, he's going to come and he's going to try and steady the ship.
He has. He has.
And admittedly, for the time being, he steadied the ship, but probably not in Liz Truss's mind, because he's literally, as you keep saying, he's taken everything that she pledged, everything she promised, everything that Kwarteng did, and he's basically reversed it. So that's the mad credibility.
That's the bit where you would have thought she'd have said, "Oh no, leave me that." It's that scene in King Lear when Goneril and Regan have completely stripped him of all dignity, and originally when he carved up the kingdom to give it to his 2 daughters, he was allowed to keep 100 troops, and then he would stay with them on rotation. And eventually they got bored of feeding his troops. It was costing them too much money, and they kept trying to sort of get off with the kitchen maids and cause a rumpus in the in the stables. And so they talk him down to 20, 10, and the 2 sisters join together, and he's left with nothing. One of them says, I can't remember which one, "What needs one? Why do you even need 1 troop?" And that's what just happened. So there was nothing left there that could be described as part of her platform. Nothing at all. Simon, I'm going to rudely move on and cut you off in your prime, because I have said his name in the mirror 3 times, and Martin Lewis has appeared, the money-saving expert who has become something of a, if he wasn't already. Congratulations on your National Television Award win, Martin.
Thank you very much.
Although, knowing you as I do, you'll be much more concerned with talking to people about what they can do and what the new developments mean. Let's just begin briefly, if we may, with the political analysis that you shared a few moments ago, and the idea that the failure to, because one of my callers actually was saying it on air just as you were tweeting it, this idea that they postponed the obvious need for action on energy bills for so long that she ended up essentially hostage to it when the mini budget finally came around.
Yeah, I mean, I have just put out a tweet on this. I've said it before, but it sort of is crystallised in the light of what's happened. During the zombie government period, when there was the leadership contest, even though it was blindingly obvious at the time that energy intervention was needed, and I was out there, begging and pleading, yes, no plans were made by the government and no plans were promised by the Liz Truss leadership. Yet they did at the time make campaign pledges on tax cuts, which were expensive. But it looks like they did that without factoring in the cost of energy intervention. So they were now starting to lock themselves into the tax cut. And at the same time, Liz Truss poo-pooed handouts to differentiate herself from Rishi Sunak. We don't do handouts. I don't like handouts. So then when they get into government, and it became blindingly obvious, we're on for an 80% increase in the price cap on top of the 54% increase in April and a likely bigger rise in January, taking typical energy bills to around the £4,000, £5,000 a year mark for someone on typical use. They had to intervene. They had to do it at breakneck speed. They did it by urgently meeting the energy firms, but they didn't want to do handouts because that had come up in it. So the only route was a universal reduction, the price guarantee, which is the most expensive and poorly targeted intervention. They did that. It was very expensive, but they also went on with their other campaign promises too, and the two together, that combination seems to me to be what toppled the whole house of cards. And it was, if you look back, and now we have a tiny bit of benefit of hindsight, it was a very strange way to operate by ignoring the political realities of the energy crisis. I mean, you're much more polemic on these things than I am, James, and this is my coded language.
Of
right?
course
It was a strange way to operate, and certainly, they have now paid for it, and unfortunately, the country has paid for it because we can reverse the position that we're in. But the damage that's been done over the last month, the cost to the country is going to be large. And we're now having to go back and do even stronger measures than we would have done had this not happened.
Utterly self-inflicted is the thing that everybody will struggle properly to process, although that analysis that they may possibly have got away with one or the other of those two huge expenditures, but the idea that they were simultaneously going to get away with both of them without explaining where the money was going to come from was pretty much the distillation of what unsustainable means.
And you go back to that lead, and I was on your show and I was on Good Morning Britain and everywhere else saying we have to have intervention. We need intervention. And it was completely ignored during the leadership campaign. And I couldn't understand at the time how that was happening, that they didn't understand the realities. And so it is rather frustrating. It was rather that period of zombie government has a lot to answer for. Yeah. I mean, the 1922 committee are obviously doing things now. I wrote to them at the start of that saying, please do not take so long. We cannot afford to wait in the midst of a cost of living crisis to have an inactive government. And this is all knock-on effects, if you ask me. And it is tragic because I come from a position of I campaign for change, not for the point to try and expose the wrong of this government and try and bring another party in, but to try and make sure things are working. I hope Jeremy Hunt gets it right.
Of course.
I want him to succeed, like I'd want any chancellor and any prime minister of any party to succeed, because that means the lives for the people in this country are better. I hope this is the right movement going forward.
Which is a patriotic position. It's a much maligned and misused word, but the concern for your fellow citizens, a concern for everybody who lives here, should actually see everybody, even Keir Starmer, wanting Jeremy Hunt's interventions today to go as well as is humanly possible.
And to be fair, they look like the right interventions.
They do. Well, it's a complete reversal of the wrong intervention, isn't it? So it's two negatives make a positive. We remember that from the LSE.
I mean, ultimately, nobody wants. It would have been nice to have a cut in the basic rate of income tax. That would have been good. That would have helped people, but. Unfortunately, the cost of it in terms of interest rate mortgages, government borrowing and the knock-on for the future is probably too much at the moment. So I think his interventions are probably correct. I'll leave your other guests to discuss what that means. The fact that Trussonomics has been completely hunted down is now my one worked on soundbite, so I'm quite pleased with it.
See what he did there. You see what he did there.
Let's go with it. I will leave other people to discuss what that means for the Prime Minister, but obviously it doesn't look very good.
But before you go, a quick word on what the end of the price, the early end of the energy price guarantee will mean for punters?
Right. Well, so from April, it looks like we'll move towards the targeted help. And I suspect that will probably resemble something like the Rishi Sunak package back in May. Obviously, we don't know this. They'll investigate it, where you had money being put off bills and more money for those on benefits, disabilities, and for people who were on the state pension. But they have to be, the energy costs have come down. I'm still waiting to look at the forecast for what the price cap, if that's still in existence after April, will be. But it won't be as high as we thought it would have been. It was over this winter, and that was already in where it was going to be high, and that was locked in. So I think there will be targeted intervention. It will have to reach up to the middle classes. It will, and middle earners. It cannot just be at the lowest end. That isn't enough. But it doesn't have to reach to the top end. People like me do not and never need this support, and that shouldn't have come in. There are big questions for those who were on fixed tariffs. If you were on a fixed energy tariff, if you were on a very cheap one, you're still on it, so that will continue. If you were on one that was more expensive than the price guarantee, then you got a reduction in your kilowatt hours rate to bring you to the price guarantee. So that will probably end in April.
Right.
But some people have automatically been moved to the price guarantee tariff. There's a legal question whether their fixes will still be valid. And there is a big question at the moment for the people on the most expensive fixes whose prices have been dropped but are still above the price guarantee. They can currently move to the price guarantee. They're asking me, should I move to the price guarantee? Now we know it only lasts until April. My very, very instinctive thought at the moment is yes.
Right.
But I have not done full fact analysis on that yet, that we have more numbers to come in. We haven't even had the full details. That comes at 3:00.
So keep a very close eye on Martin.
Follow me on social media, or come to my site and we'll be looking.
Or watch his award-winning television programme as well.
True that too.
Martin Lewis, always a pleasure. The money-saving expert there, living up to his billing, as indeed he always does. And we're always particularly grateful, given that on a day like today, he has everybody, the world and his wife, on the phone asking him to appear, that he always makes so much time for my listeners on this programme. It's coming up to 12:30. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I haven't really asked the question since 10 o'clock this morning, beyond really, how are you feeling, and is there any way that we can avoid a general election? I mean, who would want to avoid a general election, except perhaps, well, I can think of two obvious constituencies of people. Labour would presumably rather take over sooner than later, will they, given that things are unlikely to get better in the short to medium term? But I don't know. But Conservative MPs facing oblivion. You look at the swings needed to get rid of household name politicians like Ian Duncan Smith or Jacob Rees-Mogg. You're looking at a 1997 style landslide at the moment. I wouldn't count those particular chickens if I were you before they hatch. Politics in this country is febrile and still heavily influenced by right-wing media, which continues to tell you that all of these things were a great idea, from Brexit right up to Trussonomics, cheering it from the rafters, front pages of the Daily Mail. Just please, if you take anything ever away from this programme, just take what these people tell you with a pinch of salt next time. The people that told you Brexit would be a great idea, the people that told you Boris Johnson was a stand-up guy, the people that told you Liz Truss was the natural heir, and that Trussonomics and trickle-down were great ideas, the people who stood there or sat here and just told you that all of this stuff was great and that you should support it. They never have to pay you a refund. They never even have to say sorry. But the next thing they try to sell you, maybe at least have a look in the box before you hand over your hard-earned. And speaking of the right-wing media, a lot of people ringing in to praise Elizabeth, a caller we had on about 20 minutes ago. This sums it up beautifully. I had to comment on your caller, Elizabeth, James. I cried when she talked of her fear for her young grandchildren. She spoke exactly of how I feel, even down to my ostrich Daily Mail reading friends. Lottie Morley is here now with your headlines. 25 minutes to 1. I normally feel this shattered on a Thursday or a Friday. God knows what this week's going to be like. I might have to... I don't know if you were aware that on Friday I was broadcasting live from Birmingham, and a word was whispered in my ear. I was crossing live to Theo Ushwood that he was actually sitting in my chair in the studio.
I've been demoted back now.
I'm delighted to report it didn't break, so the Goldilocks analogies end there. But yes. So maybe, I don't know, make you to sit in my chair again if I need to have a rest before the week is out here, because it ain't over yet.
No, I've just been sent, actually, a message that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have sent to all Conservative MPs. Do you know what they are citing as the reasoning?
Oh, hang on, who sent the message? If you can tell me that. What is it? Is it from the official spokesperson?
No, this is top sources.
Is it really? Okay. So an MP has. Also, there's no point tapping your nose like that. You're on the radio.
Sorry, I thought people could hear my nose is so big if I tap it louder.
It might go viral. There's an echo. So an MP has received this message and they have sent it to you. A secret snout.
I've got hold of a copy.
Go on. What does it say? What's the question? What are you asking me?
Excuse me.
Sorry, no, you take a moment. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of pollen around.
Apologies.
Carry on. Carry on.
They are citing,
James. Do you want some tea? No,
I'm fine, thank you. They are citing. I know how irritating it is if you're trying to listen to radio and somebody's just coughing. Apologies. Global economic conditions are worsening, and because of this, we've had to adjust our programme.
Shut up.
Global economic conditions. Now, it's interesting because
Shut up. This is global economic conditions.
Global economic conditions. Because that was the same thing.
So if it wasn't for those pesky global economic conditions, we would have got away with it.
Well, this is where it gets a bit more interesting because Number 10's spokesman said it was the global economic conditions over the weekend that meant that Jeremy Hunt...
Over the weekend? So they sacked the Chancellor by accident on Friday. Because it's only over the weekend that these policies have become...
So they've had to bring it forward because of the global economic conditions. So I did ask the Prime Minister's spokesman actually about half an hour ago. So could you just tell us which one? Yes. What happened? Which global economic condition happened? But unfortunately, they couldn't give us any... They couldn't give me a specific example.
Read it again from the top.
From the top?
Yeah, go on, the whole thing. Because people will like this theory. This is what the MPs are getting sent by their top sort of... people. Go on.
This government came in and acted immediately to support families with their energy bills this winter. We were faced with families needing to pay £6,000 this winter, and we did not allow that. Our package has substantially reduced expected peak inflation. We have supported families who needed it most, and we have been dealing with the tax burden by cutting national insurance contributions. Global economic conditions are worsening, and because of this, we've had to adjust our programme. Interest rates are going up globally. I don't think there are any interest rates.
Don't do commentary. Give it to us straight.
We are acting responsibly. When we get it wrong, we will say so. Yeah. The Prime Minister and the new Chancellor...
But they haven't... Sorry, I'm doing commentary. Shut up, James.
But they haven't said sorry. They've said they've got it wrong, but they haven't said sorry. The Prime Minister and the new Chancellor are in lockstep and are committed to long-term reforms. Of course, this government is still going for growth, but we need to change the way we approach this. The government is committed to investment zones, to speeding up roads projects, to standing up to Russia and to increasing our energy supplies so that we are never in this situation again. We are making it easier for businesses to take advantage of Brexit so they can do things more easily, leading to lower costs, lower prices and higher wages. This government is on the side of hard-working people who do the right thing, and it is for those people who we are delivering it for. Of course, the Prime Minister was previously in lockstep with Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng.
Here come the locksteppers.
No, I'm not going to do. I'm not going to do that.
Were you going to pick up on that rap?
No, the Prime Minister and the new, as I said,
you got to laugh.
They were in lockstep until.
Of course they were, until they weren't.
And
now she's in lockstep with Jeremy Hunt, who's going in exactly the opposite direction from Kwasi Kwarteng, who she was in lockstep with until Friday lunchtime.
But what was also interesting was, and Martin Lewis was referring to it there, this review about what support is going to be offered after April next year. And what was interesting about Number 10...
That's what the Labour Party were going to do all along.
Yes, it was. But they're saying it's a Treasury-led review.
Right.
So in effect, Liz Truss has no say.
What does she have a say in?
Very little now.
And there's nothing here, because you might have thought she'd have said, can we please just leave, let me keep the DVDs, or something like that. But no, you can't have the DVDs.
She's holding a cabinet drinks reception at 7:30 this evening.
For the cabinet?
For the cabinet.
My God, I've been to some uncomfortable parties. It was bad enough when Farage worked here, but good grief, that's going to be an uncomfortable
Before that,
gathering.
she's meeting the One Nation caucus at 6.
Of course she is.
So it's going to be a tough afternoon for the Prime Minister.
Simon says, you two are so good this morning. I wonder what the rest of the week will be like. There's only one way to find out, Simon. You've got to tune in at 10 o'clock every morning and we'll find out what's happening. So, I mean, again, and I've got Luke and Connor waiting. Sorry, lads, it's an East Midlands massive on the switchboard there in Nottingham and Leicester. But that thing you just read out, that is both it's giving the MPs an idea of what they should be saying in interviews, which is doubling down on just keep talking about the energy package, even though we're now diluting the energy package, keep talking about the energy package. But they are genuinely claiming that global economic conditions are the reason why it's all fallen apart.
Combined with the mistakes they've made.
Oh, they did say that.
So it's combined. It's two reasons. It's
but no apologies.
No sorry. So
these MPs who've got to go out, I mean, I think of Chris Philp, who was touring the studios insisting that everything was going swimmingly. And I think he's been demoted now as
Cabinet's
well.
office, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean...
replaced by
I've never known. Have you never known anything like this? Even during when Theresa May was wrestling with Brexit, it was never this chaotic, was it?
No.
You knew where things were coming from and you knew why they were coming.
Yes. So basically what's happened is that the grown-ups in the Conservative Party have said, we're taking control. We're taking back the train set. You had a go. We told you this was going to happen. You smashed it to bits. And now we're going to come in and try and put it back together again.
Yeah, but I mean, you say grown-ups. Tim Stanley says that Liz Truss is the victim of a very British coup. This is a bloke who often pops up on Thought for the Day, of all places, on Radio 4. Deviate from orthodoxy and you'll be crushed by the Remainer expert-driven establishment. So you say grown-ups, he says the Remainer expert-driven establishment. And he's got a picture byline in the Daily Telegraph, so you've got to take him seriously.
I think there's a feeling that you can't really look at markets like that and say that. And that was a frustration, that the excuse when Tory MPs were going in front of, there was a Zoom call with Theresa Coffey, the Deputy Prime Minister, and they were trying to
even talked about her dishing out antibiotics like Smarties to her mates as health policy, have we? We'll do move on to that tomorrow.
So there was this sort of idea that, and Jacob Rees-Mogg, the business secretary, had criticised the OBR that these institutions and the markets were somehow biased against the government. Is ridiculous.
Well, reality was biased against Brexit from the start, and that was the thing that Jacob Rees-Mogg and his mates could never acknowledge. Do we know whether he did much as business secretary to stop Mini moving their production of the new electric Mini out of the country, which was announced quietly over the weekend? I could find out how hard Jacob tried, will you, to save all of those car manufacturing jobs. I think they're mostly in Wales. And second question, what happened to all the control we took back?
The control?
The control. We took back control, remember? Take back control. We took it back. Where's it gone?
I don't know.
Where, have you checked? Do we know?
No, I can find out.
Do you remember when the removal vans arrived outside Downing Street to take away all that hyper-expensive stuff that Boris Johnson had taken money off a donor to buy for his wife? Could they have accidentally packed all the control in the back of the lorry?
Yes. Actually, the wallpaper's still there.
Is it? Poor old Liz Truss isn't even going to have the time to take it down, is she?
No. I think she said
the wallpaper is going to last longer than both of the last two prime ministers. Will she be here? Will she be doing PMQs on Wednesday? Go on, take a punt.
Oh God, goodness me!
It's all right. I'm not going to hold you to
Wednesday. I don't know.
Luke's in Nottingham. Luke, I hope that was worth waiting for. What made you pick up the phone, my friend?
I think you're talking about how people are feeling about this, and I think for me it's angry. It really is just like seething anger now. It's incredible, this situation that we've been allowed to get ourselves into, that they've got us.
The only way to alleviate the anger or to stay calm is to remember. And actually, this might make you angrier in the great scheme of things, but the only way to understand it is. They all think it's a game. They think it's all a game. They all think it's all a game. They think it's funny.
I think this is the problem. I think can we have a general election? I don't think we can, because I think what happened as that message that your colleague just read out about where we're going now on how we're going to kind of spread this new truth. About why we've done what we've done, and it wasn't a mess. It wasn't our hand grenade. It's almost like a playground now. It's like someone's pushed someone over, and then they pointed to someone else and said it's their fault. And that's what's happened to our economy. They've pushed our economy off a cliff, and now they're pointing at everyone else and saying it's not us, miss, it's them.
Yeah. Global conditions, mate. Global economic conditions.
We're expected to swallow this, and this has been going on since 2019, since Boris Johnson in his new truth was able to take away all of the people that had any kind of opposing view in the Conservative Party. They've all gone. And all that's left now is an echo chamber of right-wing people shouting into the wind who can be heard the loudest. Nadine, Boris, all this. It's just It's sickening.
It's sickening and it's sick as well. Sorry, carry on.
The problem we've got now is that they can't call a general election, because if they do, they know they're going to lose. It might not be a landslide. It should be a landslide, but they will lose. I think that's the situation that we're in. I think that will be quite obvious.
They will be betting, as we said, that things can't possibly be this bad in 6 months or 12 months or 18 months or 2 years, so we will hang on until the end of 2024
so they'll
and
just
see
keep
what
throwing
happens.
the next person in, Penny Mordaunt, Rishi Sunak, whoever it is that's the most popular person in the Conservative Party at the time, and they'll come on and say, we've got a mandate from the people, which they haven't, and we're following our policies, which they're not. And we're just I've never voted Labour in my life, ever. Not once have I voted Labour, and I am voting Labour at the next election, just to give someone else a chance, just to reset this system, even if it's just for 5 years, just to kind of put the brakes on this crazy train that is our politics at the moment, and just try to calm things down again. And maybe, I'm not a Conservative voter either, but maybe the Conservatives can come back with a better party. It's going to take a long time. But,
isn't it just?
like I said,
and also, just people
Labour.
who at least look like they might know what they're playing at would be preferable to this lot. That's all. I mean, regardless.
It'd be nice, wouldn't it?
It would be nice. Before you go, I should have asked everybody this. Do you know where all the control has gone, the control that we took back in 26? Have you any idea what happened to it?
No, sorry.
No, well, keep your eyes out. You cover Nottingham. You cover Nottingham, and I'll cover West London, all right?
Will do.
Carry on. It's 12:47. It is 12:51. If you've had enough of politics, my last two tweets involve me offering up my punditry about video games from the 1980s for a rather splendid-looking new film that I was proud to contribute to, and my views on non-league football, notably Kidderminster Harriers. I was interviewed by a lovely bloke called Rich, who puts together the programme for Telford United, but also works for the Shropshire Star, the non-league paper, and not the non-league full-time podcast is what I was contributing to. And Gracious Films have made the new film about the ZX Spectrum. So if you follow me on Twitter and you have the vaguest interest in either non-league football or the ZX Spectrum, then there's a couple of little distractions and diversions for you there. But back to the fray. Connor is in Leicester. Connor, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I'm calling to answer earlier. You were talking about how do we get through this without a general election. And I can't see, with the polls the way they are, I can't see the Tories at all voting for that. I think they're just going to try and resolve it within themselves for as long as they possibly can. They'll just put anyone in charge, see if that improves the polls.
Because they can't go to the country. So bizarrely, that great exercise in taking back control, which I've been sniggering about for half an hour or so, what we've done is essentially break democracy as well, with a combination of the Fixed Term Parliament Act, a mandateless Prime Minister who's abandoned her own major policy platforms, can't be replaced or will be replaced by somebody else who daren't call a general election because of the carnage that would ensue. So the British public are left with their third Prime Minister in 3 years, well, in a year, actually, their third Prime Minister in a year, if it happens before Christmas, for whom, and the second one for whom, the first one for whom absolutely nobody has voted. The last one, 80,000 people voted for, and the one back in 2019 received a resounding victory by dint of being up against the complete lemon and telling lots and lots of lies that people believed. It's great, isn't it? It's great, this democracy.
I came up with a scenario where I could actually see us going 2 years and having the general election at the previous time. And what they'd do is they'd bring probably Rishi Sunak or maybe Penny Mordaunt or one of the, supposedly sensible ones in, try and get the economy to a, non-collapsing state.
Yeah.
And then they'd look at the polls, be like, oh, we're still behind. And then someone would have the bright idea of, let's bring Boris Johnson back in.
Well,
and maybe
Nadine Dorries has already done that.
Win the election again.
Nadine's already done that this morning. She's tweeted that this morning, which, again, as I've already covered this, it makes sense if you're still addicted to the liquid lies that are pumped out by Boris Johnson on a daily basis or a weekly basis or a monthly basis. But for the country at large, my goodness me, the party, the law-breaking party animal who didn't turn up to Cobra meetings but did turn up to illegal parties. Yeah, let's bring him back here. That'd be great. Thank you, Connor. You keep an eye out for Control in Leicester, won't you?
Yeah, I will.
Keep it covered. I've got Nottingham covered. And now Brian can handle Coulsdon. Brian, what would you like to say?
First of all, good afternoon, James.
Well, good afternoon
it's my first time calling into the show.
Welcome.
I don't know where to start. I wanted to answer his direct question
about the general election.
No, I don't see how we can feasibly move forward as a country when we have a party that they last won a general election in 2019. The Prime Minister who won that general election was then removed.
In disgrace, in utter disgrace. Yes, by his own party, by his own members, by his own cabinet.
Lied to Parliament, found to have broken the law, issued with a police fine. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Then we replaced that Prime Minister, or 170,000, 140,000 people, however many it is, replaced that Prime Minister with Liz Truss. It's been an absolute disaster. And now we face the prospect of yet another Prime Minister coming in, which the electorate has no say over, has no chance to really scrutinise policy, to question it. And it's the fact that the country has, let me not say has allowed itself, but the fact that we find ourselves in this situation is ridiculous. There should be some form of mechanism which is like, okay, if the government, the ruling party in government, has shown itself to be basically incompetent, leaders have been replaced, unheard of,
No, you're right. You can't believe it, can you? I sense there's an incredulity in your voice, that you just presume that the system would somehow not allow what is now happening and what's going to happen next.
Absolutely. And another thing is just that, again, it's the almost like the complete, I don't want to say victory, but it feels like the most appropriate word. The complete victory that like the ideologues have had in brainwashing, the general population into believing that this nonsense that they talk is actually in our best interest, when it clearly isn't. And all of the facts point to trickle down economics, massive tax cuts for the top 1% earners in the country. They do not work for the general population. And I'm almost like, flummoxed, because I just don't know how we...
You don't have to be almost. I'm completely flummoxed. You don't have to be almost flummoxed. I'm fully flummoxed. I'm absolutely chuffing flummoxed. Absolute flummoxed to the left of me, flummoxed to the right of me. And you make several brilliant points, but you remind me of America. And the commentary not long after Trump came to power that just reflected on the fact that the founding fathers, when they wrote the Constitution, had never conceived of someone as corrupt and as corrupting as Donald Trump. The system could not cope with somebody as corrupt and as corrupting as that. Our Constitution, which is unwritten, of course, can't cope with a level of incompetence and chaos that was never really conceived. You'd have to go back to Suez to see a misjudgment on this scale on the international stage. But this just doesn't make any sense. How can the system not somehow have a mechanism in place that has now been triggered? How can there be an alarm not ringing? How can there not be a sort of like that chair? I don't know if you watched the Graham Norton show, and he presses the button and the chair flips backwards and the occupant of the chair is tipped into oblivion. There is nothing to do that to this government. Brian, take care. That was quite a debut, mate. You picked your moment, didn't you?
Well, thank you very much for putting me on. It's been a pleasure.
Keep an eye out for Control in Bright. All the Control we took back in 2016. We can't find it at the moment. So you keep Coulsdon covered for me, Brian, all right?
Will do, James.
Thank you, mate. We've got Nottingham, Leicester, Coulsdon, West London. Anyone else? Remember, we took back Control in 2016 and it seems to have disappeared. I don't know whether Boris Johnson actually packed it when he was leaving Downing Street or whether it actually quit the field before that, but it must have gone somewhere. So, it's only Monday. Good grief, feels like I've put in a shift already this week. It's only Monday. Keep your eyes peeled. Remember Shaw Taylor on Police 5? One perhaps for the younger listeners, but keep them peeled, all right? Keep an eye out for Control, because we took it back only then to apparently completely lose it again. We'll be back tomorrow morning from 10, no doubt, revisiting some of this territory and hopefully finding time to talk about Therese Coffrey's decision that we should all start treating antibiotics like Smarties. Meantime, here's Minnie Ripperton.
Thank you very much, James. 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 Thank you very